We are on Unit 3, which is Argumentative Writing. This is Lesson 1, where we'll learn how to write argumentative introductions. Let's first talk about the difference between opinion writing, which is something you might have done in the past, versus argumentative writing, which is now what you're expected to do. In opinion writing, you're really only looking at one side of an issue where there's usually two sides. So you would kind of yell and argue for your side, and you kind of pretend that the other side doesn't exist. You ignore it. You pretend there's no valid arguments for the other side. Sometimes opinion writing even belittles the other side, meaning you make fun of the other side or you pretend that their arguments are stupid. The main tool you use would be emotional appeals. And when I say that, it's maybe arguing without facts, just about how it makes you feel. The main goal of your writing when you do opinion writing is just to convince the reader. You want them to join your side. Or else, right? If you don't join your side, you're stupid. Argumentative writing, it sounds actually kind of worse, but it's actually a lot more level-headed. The main goal of argumentative writing is to start a conversation. So that's what should be happening with both sides of the argument, listening and speaking. So argumentative recognizes and mentions both sides of the argument. You can respectfully disagree with the other side if you do choose a side. The main tool you use would be evidence and warrants, explaining the evidence. And your main goal is maybe not convince the reader to join your side, but at least make the reader respect your argument. So your argumentative paper needs a good introduction. Why so? Well, in a world today, a lot of people might not care about your topic or your argumentative paper. So your goal today is to get your audience to care about it. Your argument needs to matter to your audience. And you've learned this before. Good introductions hook the audience, build a bridge, and share a main point. Let's talk about hooking the audience. So there's a lot of different strategies you could use to make your topic matter to your audience or to hook them. So one, you could tell a story. It could be real or it could be hypothetical. A hypothetical story is like imagine this, right? You could ask a question. You could give a really interesting fact or statistic, or an analogy related to the topic, like a parable or something like that. I picked a topic that would make a very good argumentative paper. Minimum wage. It seems like there's people on both sides of this issue. Should we raise the minimum amount that workers should make while working to, let's say, $12 an hour or $15 an hour? You could use a story to catch the audience's attention. Maybe a story about a family that got hurt by this. Like this one, for example. On the corner of 34th and Main Street, you can find the Purple Plum Diner. This diner has been owned by the Thiel family for 4 generations. However, things haven't quite been the same this past year. With the recent citywide minimum wage increase to $12 per hour, the family needed to raise prices to match costs. This has left the diner rather empty. We've only had half the customers we had over a year ago, said Shauna Thiel, the current owner. A question could also catch your reader's attention because it makes them have to think. For example, is $8 per hour enough to provide for 3 children? And that question probably is arguing for a higher minimum wage, I imagine. You could also give an interesting statistic, something like this. If all Americans owned $100, over 45 of that amount would be owned by the richest 1% of people. So I think that's obviously a statistic that would be in favor of raising the minimum wage to give more money to the rest of people. You could also use an analogy. One classic analogy would be from the Bible in 2 Samuel 2. This is where the prophet Nathan approaches King David about the sin of adultery and murder that he did. If you remember, Nathan gives the story about the rich man who steals the one sheep from the poor man. And it gets David so interested but also so angry. And then Nathan makes his point. You are that man. You're that rich man, David. But that's just an example of using an analogy, kind of like a parable in a way, if you want to think about it that way. I recommend giving this a try sometime. It's actually a very effective way to catch your audience's attention. Let's have you practice a hook. So I'd like you to pick two of the strategies that are listed here: story, question, statistic, analogy, and write a hook for the topic of the British taxes on the colonists back when, they were taxing the tea and taxing the stamps, all those things. Obviously, the colonists had their opinions or their thoughts of that issue, but the British also had a reason for doing it too. So you can make it for either side, really. Just try to pick two hooks to get your audience thinking and get your audience caring about that topic. So pause the video and give that a shot. Let's now talk about constructing a thesis. Your thesis is the main argument, the main point, if you want to think about it that way. And it should be very clear, and it should be also general, not too specific, because you're going to get more specific with your claims. The first thing I want to talk to you about is that an argumentative thesis, meaning you're not doing an opinion, remember, it should mention the other side. It should actually acknowledge that the other side does exist, that people do think differently. So you see how I do it over here? This is a thesis for a higher minimum wage, for example. So this here acknowledges the other side. While many are fearful of a minimum wage increase, here's now the main point. Our city would experience numerous benefits of raising it to $12 per hour. That would be your thesis, the main points you're trying to make in a paper. One thing you could also do is to list your parts in your thesis. Usually you have your main point, but then you have your three maybe reasons that you're going to show later in your paper, and each of these reasons becomes a paragraph. So you can do that in your thesis to kind of preview your main points. So for example, raising the minimum wage might seem enticing. This would be a thesis against minimum wage. So raising the minimum wage might seem enticing, so we're acknowledging the other side. But the unexpected consequences of it could cripple our city's economy with job loss, business flight, businesses going away, and increased prices. I'd like you to try making a thesis now too. So you're going to be arguing either for or against the British taxes and all the things that the colonists had. I would like you to practice that you should mention the other side and then maybe list the parts to go with your thesis too. I'll be interested in what kind of thesis you put together that you'll be sharing with me later. So take a pause and give it a try. A really important part of the introduction that often gets forgotten is to connect your hook to your main point, your thesis, and that's called a bridge, right? So the bridge does talk about how the two are related. Without that bridge, it gets really awkward and forced when you go from your hook to your main point. So for example, if you remember this hook before, where it's the story about the Thiel family, right, and they've lost all their customers, and your thesis is that raising the minimum wage did seem enticing, but there are unexpected consequences. We need to connect to these two. We need to connect this to the Thiel family, or the Purple Plum Diner. So the bridge does that with this right here. We have the story about the Purple Plum, and then we say, is the Purple Plum alone in their struggle? Or is this new law causing other local businesses anxiety? And then now here we got our main point, that the raising the minimum wage did seem enticing at the time, but the unexpected consequences may have crippled our city's economy. Here would be another example of a bridge. So we have the hook here, and then this is the one that was for minimum wage, if you remember. Is $8 per hour enough to provide for 3 children? It certainly does not seem so when the average apartment costs $800 a month to rent, monthly food costs are over $100 per person, and health insurance premiums are skyrocketing. The main point is that while many are fearful of a minimum wage increase, our city would experience numerous benefits of raising it to $12 per hour. If you went from here to here, it would be very awkward. This bridge ties it together. It says, sadly, many are stuck in this perpetual cycle that we're talking about here of not earning enough at work to meet rising expenses at home. Is there a solution? And then the main point is the solution, right? So that bridge really ties these two together. Now I'd like you to give it a try. So I'd like you to pick one of the hooks that you wrote and then the thesis that you wrote, and I would like you to put a bridge in between those two. So write a bridge that would fit and make those two connected. So take a pause and get that done. So I just want to share how you get scored when you do writing groups. So it all kind of fits into this category here. So your introduction paragraph does get scored, and then the readers are going to be looking for a hook, a bridge, and a thesis. And then they might share some comments about how you did that as well.